welcome to another episode of our personal empowerment audio series, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder. In today's show, for those of you who've been fans of Michael's for a long time, this will be a familiar phrase, but we're going to put it under the microscope in today's show. This is called even-tempered, well-reasoned responses.
Yeah, it really does have two parts to it. The even-tempered part is manage those emotions, and then the part that follows is well-reasoned. So we're talking about managing feelings and thoughts, the emotions and the reasoning. And how do you do that? I mean, don't we all know the feeling of speaking a little too soon, flying off the handle? Some people get a reputation for having a short fuse. Well, I've said things that I don't even think qualify for short fuse. They just immediately blurt it out. And then later, in retrospect, yeah, I could have handled that better.
Yeah, silence is never more golden than just before you're about to blurt something stupid.
Here's the secret. When you don't know what to say, just don't say anything. And when you don't know what to do, don't do anything. Whoever taught us that we have to immediately, recklessly say and do things before we've had an opportunity to calm down emotionally and to enjoy thinking more reasonably as a result. I think that's really the key. Now, what Steve and I are going to talk about is how do you make a habit out of that? How do you lift from the unconscious into your conscious awareness? Wait a minute, just don't say anything right now. It's not like you have to switch from blurting to this great wisdom. Just practice not saying or doing anything until you can begin to pull it together. And then we'll tell you a little bit about how to do that too. But what if the first step in this process is just when you feel that rage, that outrage, that indignation, even if you think it's righteous at the time, reconsider, hold on, slow down. Just don't say or do anything until you've taken the opportunity to review what you're about to say and do.
So what does an even-tempered mean? I mean, what is even temper? Well, we're talking about temper, which comes from the concept of temperament, which is like your attitude, the way you feel, your overall sense of how things are. Your temperament is like upbeat, or it's excited, or it's sad, but temper is a much smaller piece of that, because we don't think of temper in reference to sadness or loneliness or even fear. We think of temper in terms of one basic emotion, and that's anger. You know, keeping your temper, holding your temper means not expressing your anger, and losing your temper means expressing your anger inappropriately. There are two other options. You can not express your anger, or you can express your anger appropriately. But holding on to your anger is a pretty dangerous thing. You know, that's where a lot of dis-ease comes from, is holding on to anger, frustration. So expressing anger in an effective way is the key. The secret is not to lose your anger. An even temper doesn't mean no temper. It means that you are even in the way you are experiencing your temper. And really, that's sort of another definition of mindfulness. It's experiencing your temper like stepping back and saying, I'm angry. I notice that I'm angry. I'm not going to behave angrily, but I experience the fact that I'm angry. I know what angry is. I feel it. I acknowledge it. But I'm not going to allow the fact that I'm feeling angry mean that I'm angry person. I'm not an angry person. I'm not going to have to just behave angrily because I'm experiencing this thing called anger. I can just feel anger, experience the fact that I'm feeling anger, and still take that moment, or maybe long moment, to be silent and not blurt out angrily.
You know, Steve, I think that what we're talking about here, if we take a couple of steps back, zoom out a little bit, is really big in terms of the evolution of human awareness and consciousness. I believe the majority of people, humans, are still primarily looking to manage other people and circumstances. And the idea of self-awareness and self-management is still relatively new and unconsidered by most people. There's just no discussion about it. People don't talk about it, right? Oh, hey, let me tell you about this wonderful breakthrough I made. I've learned, instead of controlling other people, I'm going to control myself. I mean, I'm sure there are some conversations along those lines.
I've never heard it around the water cooler.
No, exactly. Or on chat television or something. And yet, people are beginning to move in that direction when they talk about personal responsibility or being accountable or ownership. I don't mean of property, but of your behavior and your countenance, your disposition. To take ownership of that is to maintain your power. When you blame other people for the situation you're in and try to control the stimulus of what's happening to you in your life, you end up giving your power away. Rather ironic, isn't it? Giving your power away in your attempt to be more powerful. The secret is you don't control the stimulus. You give up trying to control other people. There's threads of this in the culture. I mean, even little children will say, I know you are. What am I? You know, part of neener is it takes one to know one. I think that's really a high philosophical or psychological concept, but after armoring ourselves with that in the playground in grade school, we sort of give it up. We sort of forget that we've got the power to choose our perception and response. Rather than controlling others, we could control ourselves. Instead of changing the world so that we benefit, we could change ourselves and give that to the world. This is big. I think it's really, really
What's
big.
that great quote? Instead of covering the world with leather, you can just wear shoes. You know, you don't have to change everything else. To have leather under your feet's all you need. You don't need it everywhere. So we're talking about how to create that in your life, how to have that ability to, instead of react in like a knee-jerk autopilot, you didn't think about it, you just did it without thinking kind of way. What does it take to create an even-tempered, well-reasoned response? Well, again, it's the moment between the mallet hitting your knee and the knee jerking. You know, it's that moment you have between the stimulus and the response called perception. When the mallet's hitting the knee, there is no perception. There's no moment between. But when stuff happens, you have the ability, as Michael said, you really can't control what happens very often, but you do have the ability to, how am I going to look at it? What mood am I going to be in? What attitude? What temperament am I going to take? Is this going to be a moment when this happens that I'm going to use my new idea, my new habit that I'm creating in my mind? Does this qualify for the new habit I'm creating, which is take a deep breath and be silent? Does this qualify for one of those times when whatever I have to say would not improve upon the silence, and it would be better just to take that moment of silence before I blurt? So it's that moment of discernment, it's that perception, it's that point of view of I'm going to see this in a way that I'm going to decide. First thing I'm going to decide, is it dangerous? I decide that instantly. But after that, I'm going to decide, is this something I have to immediately respond to, or is this something that would serve me to use this new habit I'm programming into my mind of taking that breath and finding a space of silence as I create an even temper. Like, one of the most basic premises in Jungian psychology is that water represents emotion. That's a sort of basic premise in a lot of psychologies. Water and emotion. And so if the water's choppy, if it's moving fast, you can't look very deep into it. But if it's even, if the water is calm and even, you can see very deep. Regardless of whether the water's really hot in emotion or a cold emotion, you can see real deep into it if it's even. So by evening your temper, that doesn't mean not have the anger. It doesn't mean have less anger. It just means experience looking at the anger from this not crazy, choppy place, from this calm place. It's not a paradox to experience great anger from a calm place. You know, I read this incredible book, Man's Search for Meaning, by Viktor Frankl, who's talking about what horrors happened to him in the Nazi concentration camp. But the man is clearly not coming from panic when he's talking about it. He's coming from, and I heard him speak actually when he was in his late 90s. He comes from this very centered, calm place about, you know, something that is not. So it's not like you have to. He didn't let go of his anger. He never. In fact, the one thing that kept him alive and kept him going was his belief that one day he's going to live through this and go tell the world how to make this never happen again. You know, so he had this incredible passion for telling the world, you know, about what happened and to make sure it never happens again. So we don't have to have temper take us over. We can have great anger and yet remain even-tempered. And it's all about detachment. It's all about you're not the anger. You are a human being watching yourself experiencing being angry.
When I interviewed the actor Martin Sheen, who did West Wing, of course, and so many wonderful movies, Badlands and Gandhi, and he told me that was his favorite book of all times, and he buys them a dozen at a time and gives them away. Viktor Frankl's book.
Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
Amazing book.
Yeah, because it's all about maintaining your power to respond and the power that you have to choose the way you look at a situation. Like a wise woman or man might say something like, well, I guess we'll just chalk it up to experience. And maybe it cost them some money. Maybe it was a painful experience, but where the vast majority of people would be angry and perhaps vengeful, maybe hold a grudge that really only hurts them for a long period of time. A wise woman or man is a person that would understand that the only person you're hurting is yourself by carrying this hurt around to prove how wronged you've been. There's a story in Buddhism that is sort of funny that illustrates this about punishing someone by throwing a burning coal at them. But the problem is you got to pick up you got to pick it up and hold on to it before you can throw it. So who gets hurt, right? And that's exactly what happens, you know. If we are willing to cultivate the wisdom to, as Steve has said, abandon this old reactionary, it comes out of fight or flight. If you listen to more than a half a dozen of these personal empowerment programs we provide for you here, it's all fear-based, right? And in our past, it wasn't a bad thing. It allowed our ancestors to survive. But they were facing real danger. And the vast majority of what upsets us and makes us feel as if we're in danger really isn't dangerous at all, except to your pride, perhaps, or the egoic self that is putting up a false front about who you are anyway. So, as we develop confidence in the truth of who we are as humble, spiritual individuals, and I emphasize individuality, that's a very important part of avoiding glamour and avoiding egotism. It's a funny thing. People say, oh, they must think they're real special. What a big ego. Well, actually, no. People that are egotistical are not people that have this calm, quiet confidence about themselves. They don't think they're good or special. They're terrified that you're going to see how insecure they are. So the ego is a total, phony, false front. What's the Who song? Eminent front. And then Daltrey adds, it's a put-on. This eminent front. Well, that's what's behind the part of us that doesn't want to relax, calm our temper, and become well-reasoned, but just blurt it out. That's the animal nature, and you can raise that frequency. You can lift that vibration from the groin, through the belly, all the way up into the heart. Or if you want to think of it that way, all the way up into your head. Pause, breathe. That's a message to the brain that you're really safe, even though you feel threatened. That's just the ego part that feels threatened. That's not who you really are. Breathe. The brain goes, oh, I guess we're safe now. Look at this breathing. Let go of muscular tension, reinforcing the message. Well, I guess we must be safe. Create a sense of relaxation. And now you can calm that emotional nature. And guess what follows automatically? Choices, options, alternatives, creativity. It's like, well, wait a minute. Now that I think about it, I have another choice besides reacting like an angry fool. I could do this. I could do nothing at all. I could do that. I could consider the third option and the fourth alternative and the fifth possibility. I might even be able to empathize and try to understand the other person. But the real secret is to give up trying to control the other in your life and instead manage the self. That little quotation Steve said from Eastern philosophy about wearing slippers instead of covering the world with leather is very, very profound. There's a similar one. I'm not sure who gets credit for it, but it goes something like, everybody wants to change the world, but very few people think about managing themselves as a way to do it.
Yeah, Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." That's one of my favorite quotes of all time. So we're talking about, like, there is no experience in life other than the true danger, the clear and present, life-threatening danger kind of experience, where you'll react with fight or flight. And that's react, not respond. There's no thinking involved there. That's just knee-jerk. No other thing that happens in life deserves a blurted, angry response. I mean, everything else deserves the opportunity to let your even temper mind look at this situation before you say anything or do anything. Everything else benefits from that taking the moment, just the moment, and not doing what first comes to your mind. Because the first thing that comes to your mind when you're angry is coming from a place of fear. It's coming from a place of instinct and not intuition. It's not coming from a place of knowing what's right for you. It's coming from a place of being afraid that you're in danger. And if there's no clear and present danger, if the only danger is that your ego might get wounded in some way, that you'll feel like you're silly or stupid or conspicuous, or that's not dangerous. And responding to that in an angry way only creates more anger coming back at you. So if you're not looking for anger to come back at you, and why would you, unless you're trying to provoke someone, then the moment that you take before you get angry is the key. I mean, this makes sense. It can't be a worse response. You could always choose to respond the way you were going to, but now all of a sudden, as Michael was talking about, you got choices, you got options. Choices are power. Now all of a sudden you could do what you're going to automatically do, or now you could do this other thing, or that variation, or that combination, or all kinds of different things could come up. Most likely, one of them would be way better. So, how do you create that moment? To take that moment to how do you create that moment, the one moment you take before you blurt? And the answer is you can't wait until one of those moments happen. You've got to practice ahead of time. You've got to create in your mind, in, of course, that state of paradise, that focused, passion, narrow, awake alpha brainwave state. You've got to create that program in your mind, that the experience of anger, the rush of anger. You know what it feels like. You know where it starts in your body. Think about it. That rush of anger. That's the trigger. And when that triggers, instead of causing you to blah, now it causes you to that's all it takes. Just see that in your mind. Experience that in mind. Or if you're auditory, tell yourself that's what's happening. Not going to happen, mind you. It's got to be present tense. You imagine what you already want. What you do want is if you've already got it over and over again with great passion. So you practice what it is you want to create. You see yourself in those situations where you're likely to get angry. And you know who knows your buttons. You know who's likely to provoke anger in you. So practice it with them in mind, with the spouse, with the parent, with the kid, with the boss, with the whoever it is. In your mind, imagine a situation where they say something that you perceive as demeaning or hurtful or just mean. It might not be, by the way, but that's an important point, because you have the right to be angry even when you're wrong. You just don't have the right to behave angrily, especially when you're wrong. So you might be wrong. You might think they intentionally insulted you, and actually they didn't mean to say that at all. But your experience of anger is perfectly fine. It's taking that moment, and in that moment, you'll realize, well, wait a minute, maybe they didn't mean it that way. Or, well, wait a minute, now that could be interpreted in a couple of different ways. Maybe they meant to... And all of a sudden, that urge to, jump at them goes away, because now you've taken the moment to be even-tempered and have the opportunity to be well-reasoned as well.
We'll have to save that part for another whole episode, because I think the idea of projection, of misreading other people's intentions, is just huge.
Oh, indeed.
And where I see it a lot is in email and other text messages.
Where you can't see facial expressions or hear volume or intonation or any of that stuff, right?
Tone of voice or any of that. And I've had opportunities to work with business people who thought it was a real efficient way to manage, to be sending out emails when they're just down the hall, for God's sake. Right. And I would say, get off your butt, walk down there, and first of all, connect with the person.
Yeah.
Look in their face. Ask them how they're doing, how their day's going. See if you can find something positive to say, and then issue your suggestion, your memorandum, your dictum, whatever, your order, command, whatever it happens to be. But good managers are people that know how to do that. I'd like to follow up on this idea you presented, Steve, of coming in touch with that rush of anger or indignance or outrage and how it actually feels in the body.
That's the real key, because that is, if you can catch that, then you can stop yourself before you have an inappropriate reaction.
Right. Like when you said that a few minutes ago, I had an image pop into my head from I guess some cartoon when I was a kid of a thermometer that, you know, the mercury was rising very rapidly and then exploded out the top. I don't remember the situation, but somewhere I have the image of
it's iconic.
Cartoon icon. And that's the feeling I get if somebody says something that pushes my button. For example, racism. If I see racism, no matter how veiled, I experience veiled racism. Even if I know it's coming from ignorance, doesn't matter. It really pushes my button. And I'm not sure why as a white guy, except we'd have to talk about my childhood and how I identified with oppressed people as a little white kid in suburbia, right? Nevertheless, or it could be any one of a number of other things that, boy, I just, you know, I'll actually ball my hand up into a fist. Even though I have no intention of hitting anyone or anything, it's just this natural fear response. And I want to lash out. And I'm sure I have said in my life, as most people have, now look what you made me do. As if I have absolutely no responsibility for smashing this or throwing that or breaking this thing that I love. And I really like it. But you made me so angry I had to break this thing. Like I didn't even break your thing. I broke my thing, right? I was so upset.
That reminds me of that client you told me about who said, I go into the bar and people make me get into fights. I just, you know, it's not my fault. They make me do it.
People make me get in fights. What do I do?
You know? It's like, it's take that moment, you know, but again, you can't wait for the moment to take the moment. You got to take a moment now to program a moment.
To practice.
Yeah, to practice.
It's like sports, isn't it?
It is indeed. And because the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between real and imaginary, it really thinks you're actually doing this, you know. And so what happens is when the actual moment occurs, you know, both impulses go into your mind. The impulse of doing it the way you would have done it before is saying, you stupid idiot. And also the impulse of taking the deep breath. But now you're not just driven down the road of doing it one way. You've got a choice. And your mind goes, oh, wait a minute, I can. It's like when you're like starting a new eating plan. I hate the word diet, but starting a new eating plan right at the beginning, and you're motivated and you're excited, and you look at that donut and you can go, willpower. I choose to not eat that donut. Right? You know, you can choose to not go yell. You have the ability, because you've taken that moment, to exercise your willpower, your volition, your choice. You're not driven in a knee-jerk way where you don't have any ability to control yourself. You have the moment. And again, you always have the option of doing what you were going to do if you want to. But take that moment and create the choice. Visualize it, imagine it, program it in your mind over and over and over again. This is a big deal because, you know, like some of the things that we say, that we blurt out, that we regret later, hurt us for years to come. In fact, ruin relationships, really put us into stupid financial situations. I mean, occasionally we say things that are really, really dumb and really, really hurtful without meaning to at all. So we meant to say it. We just didn't mean to hurt with it. We didn't think it through that it would have hurt that way. So we need to take that moment and by not blurting what you're doing here, I think this is perhaps the single greatest way to boost your emotional intelligence. Of all the ways there are to become more emotionally mature or to be able to have better relationships with people, better relationship management is a wonderful term Michael uses a lot. The single most important thing is to not be mean, be kind, and when you are feeling endangered, you react without thinking. But if you know you're not in danger, this is not a new situation. You visualized this before. This isn't it's totally strange. I mean, I know what's happening here, and I can choose instead to be kind. And that doesn't mean I have to agree with the person. That doesn't mean I even have to do anything more than just acknowledge they're there. I don't have to say anything. I have to do anything. What I have to do is make sure I don't say anything or do anything that I'm going to deeply regret.
You often hear people say, especially Buddhists, that Buddhism in and of itself is not a religion. It's a philosophy. It's more like psychotherapy, actually, than religion. And so I heard the Dalai Lama one time say, my religion is kindness. Right? He's the head Buddhist in the Tibetan tradition. He didn't say my religion is Buddhism. They talk about loving kindness. That may be, along with gratitude, all you really need for a real spiritual tradition, something you would call religiosity or a religion.
I guess another term for loving kindness would be compassion.
Compassion is a great word for it. So we're talking about practicing a response before you react. Before you're in a situation where you would react without consciousness. Substituting, in a practice situation, a response for a reaction. In other words, practicing so that you can lift from the unconscious into the conscious the opportunity to choose how you behave. Here's another trick. We've talked about when you don't know what to say or do, just don't say or do anything right away. We talked about slow, deep breathing. There's a folk wisdom about counting to 10, but most people don't take the time.
Actually, Jefferson was the one that said that originally. He said if you before you lose your temper, count to 10, and if that doesn't work, count to 100.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd suggest counting backwards.
That would work way better.
I totally think that'll slow you down.
Especially if you count 10, 9, 8.
Right.
You're
slower and slower, deeper and deeper. Yeah, there's same thing with counting sheep. People say, well, I go to sleep by counting sheep. Well, don't count up, count down. The connotations are much more in line with going to sleep. But here's another idea for you while you're practicing. Ask questions of the person that's upset you. Okay? Now, you could do this in an aggressive way also. You could ask the kind of question that's just going to embroil the controversy and make it even worse. But if your intention is to learn more about the real intention of the other person so that you can acknowledge it, remember, you don't have to agree. The goal is just to find out, what do you mean by that? What's your intention? Why do you say that? Why do you believe that's true? Do you feel the power in the question? Have you ever wondered why authorities often do not like to be questioned? They interpret that as questioning their authority.
And if somebody says to you, are you uncomfortable? Then are you wrong? Are you, but if you say instead, am I doing something to make you uncomfortable? Well, that doesn't make them uncomfortable. It's the way you ask the question is just important. Question. Yeah, you're not blaming, exactly.
So a sincere inquiry into what do you mean by that, right? Rather than just flying off the handle and assuming that you know what they mean. And I'm going to revisit this idea of text and email because there's so much of it in our society today. Please understand, if you're ever offended by a text message or an email, that your chance of knowing the other person's intention is pretty small, all things considered. you can read it 15 different ways. Those are sentences made out of separated words, made out of separated letters that all have a bunch of different sounds and meanings. And come on, you're making these really big assumptions, and all kinds of fights and animosity and hostility can come out of that, and then you end up arguing and fighting about your response to something that never really happened.
I mean, you're expecting that they're going to get the exact same message from the email as they would have gotten if you actually said it to them. And like, if you are with somebody and you're involved intensely with them and you laugh out loud, they'll probably laugh out loud. But if you write LOL, they're not going to laugh out loud. It's not the same impact. It's a completely different experience reading what you think somebody might have meant versus watching them express it to you.
I think the power of acknowledgement without agreement is another key in all of this. We've talked about it in past programs, and I can promise you right now, we're going to talk about it more in the future because it is so powerful in interpersonal communication to realize that you can acknowledge a person's right to feel the way they feel, to think the way they think, even to behave the way they behave without agreeing with them. A statement like, I can understand how you'd feel that way, is not a concession. You haven't lost any power. You haven't given up any ground. Try it right now. Imagine a situation where somebody really upset you, and instead of saying something you regretted, you paused, thought about it, and said, I can understand how you'd feel that way.
Now, that doesn't mean I have to feel that way. I mean, like, I'm a different person than you.
Probably don't.
I've had different life experiences, so just because this happens to you and causes you to feel that way doesn't mean I'm going to feel that. But I can understand why you feel this way, puts you on the same side of the table with them. Now you're together discussing the issue instead of opposing each other, and it's almost like they're the problem or you're the problem, not the issue is the problem.
And that's all people want. In arguments, like people who love each other can really come up with some incredibly emotionally charged arguments, and it's like, we love each other, so what's with all this hostility? It's because we think we're trying to win something. We believe that we need our partner to admit that they're wrong, that they have failed, that their position is wrong, in order for us to be validated. And that's not what we want. What we want from our partner, kids or our parents, is simply to be acknowledged. Hey, Michael, that's not the way I see it. I don't really agree with that. But I can understand how you might feel that way. Boy, I'm telling you, if you try this out, and Steve's right, you've got to practice when the pressure is not on, just like an athlete, so that when you feel that rush coming from the base of your spine up through your head, and your hands are balling up into fists, and all of a sudden you feel like 6 years old, you can stop and breathe, maybe ask a question. Just don't say or do what you normally would say or do in that situation. Maybe ask a question. Why do you say that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, the little kid inside will get defensive and fight and argue and need to be right. The little kid needs to be right. The more mature self would much rather be wrong and married than right and divorced. It's really not, if you take a step back and you look at the issue, it's really not a hard choice to make. It's very much easier to be wrong and stay married. So you don't have to win every fight. In fact, you don't have to have any fights. What you need to do is understand that whoever it's more important to gets to decide, and then you have a wonderful marriage. Like, if it's more important to her than it is to me, she gets to decide, and vice versa. And then there's no fighting because you find the we is more important than the me. And again, you do it from an even-tempered place, not from a angry, you got more last time, and you got a bigger piece of pie than I did this time. what's best for the marriage is best for both of us. And so if you want it more than I want it, then I want you to have it more than I want me to have it. And that's something that doesn't evoke or provoke anger in either one of us.
Being right is not all it's cracked up to be.
No, in fact, it's a big problem in a lot of races because when you get heavily into that need to be right thing, you lose all your empathy and compassion, and you get like hyper logical, and that's mean. Hyper logical can be very, very. It doesn't consider feelings, you know.
Well, you're also alone. If you're right, and every other disagreement, anybody who sees it even slightly differently is wrong, you've isolated yourself. That's a pretty lonely and scary place to be, and yet. You've isolated yourself. Nobody puts you there.
That's Galileo about that kind of thing.
Well, I'm thinking of a discussion I heard, was more of an argument, really, with a group of guys that rode motorcycles. And one guy was talking about being cut off in an intersection by an automobile driver that made a left in front of him. And he said, that blankety blank almost killed me, and so I gave him the finger. In fact, I thought about going after him because I was right. And one older rider said quietly from the back, almost dead right. And what's the point of being right in a situation like that if you're going to get killed, right?
What's the point of taking it personally as if that driver perfectly cut you? Right. He drove all the way across town to find you to cut you off. That's what it was all about.
Well, sometimes motorcycle guys get defensive because it happens so often, and they got a point. You know, people who drive cars often are not looking for bikes or bicycles or motorcycles or pedestrians. They're looking for other cars.
One little habit, when you look left and then you look right, look left again before you go. One little habit.
Look for a motorcycle. Yeah. But anyway, this whole idea of a need to be right, understanding is so much superior to being right. First and foremostly, understanding yourself. That's much more important than even understanding the other person.
You know, so if you take that moment and you experience the even temper instead of losing your temper or having to hold or keep your temper, you just are even-tempered, then what that leads to is a mind that's capable of doing excellent reasoning, a mind that's capable of seeing the deductive and inductive logic in something, that can figure out taking a look at the big picture and extrapolating down to the individual pieces, or taking a look at the individual pieces and extrapolating out to the big picture. We can do all kinds of cool kind of well-reasoned thought in that kind of state. We can't do that kind of thinking when we're in stress. We can't do that kind of thinking when we're feeling endangered because, you know, strength and speed, fight or flight, survival trumps self-improvement or anything else. But once we have an even temper, then we can access both of our minds to do the conscious, logical, deductive kind of reasoning and also the intuitive, imagination kind of inductive reasoning. There's no limit to the kind of intelligence and even wisdom that we can pull on once we move out of that state of being holding our temper or losing our temper and move into that state of being in an even-tempered place.
So, yeah, the order is real important. You can't be well-reasoned and then manage the emotions. The reasoning, the ability to think clearly, relies upon, first of all, calming your emotional nature. So it's the even-tempered part that comes first, as we've been saying, by breathing, by relaxing, even buying some time with a couple of questions, acknowledging the other person. And with that relaxation, now you're going to be more reasonable. You're going to be more intelligent. You'll have more options and more choices mentally as well as emotionally.
And that's why in a marriage, the emotions have to be managed before the reasoning sets in. Like in my marriage, her emotions have to come before my logic. You know, we'll get to my logic, which is her logic too, once she gets out of her emotions. But her fear usually is the emotion, gets in the way. And it's not like you can logic fear away. You can't logic emotion away. You have to deal with emotions by allowing someone to express their emotion and make them feel safe in expressing their emotion. And then their emotion calms itself. But you can't just say, well, you shouldn't feel sad, or it's stupid to be angry, or that you can't logic somebody's emotions. Logic has nothing to do with emotions. Emotions are not illogical. They're non-logical. Logic is just not in the ballpark when it comes to emotions. So even-tempered and then well-reasoned. The marriage, the relationship, the discussion has to be even-tempered, and then it can move on to becoming well-reasoned.
One of the dumbest things guys can say to anybody, to a woman or another guy, is you shouldn't feel that way.
It's like never hear a woman say that.
No.
It's almost always the guy that say you shouldn't feel that way.
Well, if you compare the emotion to a physical feeling, when has anybody ever said to somebody with a physical ache or a pain or a cramp, "Oh, I hear that you got a bad migraine, but you shouldn't feel that way"?
Well, actually, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, my brother, who was about 5, lifted his head up real fast into my cousin's face, and his teeth bit my brother's back of his head, and my brother started crying, and the cousin is a couple of years older, maybe 9 years old. "Hang in there, Guts, don't cry."
You shouldn't feel that way.
You shouldn't feel that way.
Well, the truth is I do, whether it's a physical feeling or an emotional feeling. Steve's right. You can't reason away an emotion. These are two completely different parts of the self. That's why the Trinity in man is so important.
That's like if you make it really, really loud, the green will go away. It's like, wait, they don't have anything to do with each other.
You have a physical self, you have an emotional self, and you have a mental self. And we often make reference to the spiritual self as well. The portal for that is through the emotions. It's actually all three. The mental, emotional, and physical are within the spiritual. But it's the emotional nature that is the portal or the doorway, the gateway into the spiritual nature, because that is a feeling as well. You have physical feelings, you have emotional feelings, and spirituality is a feeling that requires the physical feeling to be relaxed and the emotional feeling to be calm and the mind to be quiet, and yet something then remains. And that's what alpha replicates. That's what focused passion and meditation with visualization is all about, that alignment. So let's do it now.
And speaking of portals, that's the portal to the place where the conscious and subconscious minds come in together in harmony and blend in this magnificent alpha brainwave state, this wonderful state of narrow awake, out away from that 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things going on at the same time to only one thing happening, and that one thing is the thing you choose. And it starts with closing your eyes, cutting out 86% of all sensory input comes in through the eyes. You've cut sensory input down to 14% now. And now by taking a deep, deep breath and letting your brain know you're safe, you find as you release, you begin to relax, you start to feel at peace, and with some more deep breathing, you will find you relax your body, you slow down your mind, and it feels so nice as you slide right down into paradise.
Recall how it feels, how it's felt before in your past, to be safe and relaxed. Oh, it's a wonderful feeling. You don't even need to find the words for it. Just recall that feeling, and as you continue now to allow your body to breathe itself and to continue to become even more and more relaxed, move your awareness from your head, where it most likely resides, down past the shoulders and into your body, and pretend, just imagine that you're feeling very safe and relaxed right now. That you're going to practice in a place of peace and harmony and wisdom and even-tempered, well-reasoned attitude. a composition of self, a stance that allows you to choose responses rather than simply react as if you were in some sort of danger. Even-tempered is a feeling. Well-reasoned. Remember how that feels. It's a wonderful feeling to know that you're safe enough to be able to take the time that's needed to draw upon even-tempered, well-reasoned responses.
And as you think of those times when your temper was lost and you realize you can't even measure the cost, you realize how wonderful it will be when you can have a temper that you hold evenly. It's still okay to experience anger. When something triggers you, you will. But think about how wonderful it will be. Think about the thrill to be able to experience that anger and then take that step back and just observe it and simply know that where in the past you might have blurted something stupid, this time that's not where you're going to go. This time, you're even-tempered, and your response will be well-reasoned, well thought out in advance. You're not going to just guess. You're not going to just blurt. You're not going to take that chance. You're going to take the moment, and with that breath, see all the choices that are there. And you can find a new choice. And yet another new choice, and yet another new choice anywhere. So imagine someone who pushes your button, someone who's caused you to be angry before, and imagine seeing that person right in front of you, and what's more, imagine they're saying that thing or doing that thing that just really gets you to, and what instead you do this time is you take a moment and respond with a deep breath and some silence before moving on. Deep breath and some silence. And then you'll see you now have a temper that you're holding evenly, and your response can be well-reasoned, well thought out. And what's true, too, is you can even use your intuition as an assistant to guide you. So take that moment with that person before you simply blurt. Because you know those things that you say in that moment, they very often hurt. And you can't take them back. So before you let them go, take a moment, consider, be wise, and know that silence gives you choices, many choices, right before your eyes.
See how it feels right now to imagine yourself saying in response to a conversation, I can understand how you might feel that way. You know, that's not really the way I see it, but that makes sense to me. I get that you could see it that way. That I understand. You haven't lost anything. You haven't been defeated. You've been very generous. Understanding is probably the best word for it. Share the understanding. Say, I understand. You don't have to even offer your own opinion. You could, especially now that you've laid this non-combative groundwork by acknowledging the position of somebody who has a different view than you. And here's another version of that. that you could practice right now, saying, that may be, could be. Yeah, you might be right about that. And then you could follow up with your own opinion or just say nothing at all unless you're asked how you feel. Why do we have to assert ourselves that way? Have you known people that seem to feel like it's their job to always tell you what they think? As if to set everybody who disagrees straight? You don't need to be one of those people. You could say, that may be, and nothing else.
So as you imagine yourself saying those things to those people who in the past would cause you to react, now you imagine silence and that breath, and you take a different tack, and you respond by choice. You hear all the choices and voices and pictures that you see, all these possible realities, and you choose the best one. And before you've even begun, you've stopped that anger from being emerged in a surge, and you've allowed yourself to be even-tempered, so your response can be well-reasoned indeed. Imagine that's true. Imagine that's you. Imagine it's what you already do. And the very next time you find yourself in a circumstance like that, the very next time, as a matter of fact, you'll find yourself remembering to, wait a minute, I have choices. It might come as a picture, it might come as voices, but that message will be clear that, wait a minute, there's no danger here. I have choices. And I'm going to choose a moment of silence because it's such a powerful tool for me to use. Now reorient yourself to the room you're in and start to get comfortable with the idea of coming back to this reality. Take a deep breath, and as it feels comfortable for you, bring yourself back to wide awake.
Good. Hope you like that. I think there's some really powerful tips there for improving the quality of your relationships and your ability to communicate, and I think motivate and provide leadership as well.
You know, when you say to somebody, I understand that why you might feel that way, what you're saying is, I may not agree, but I'm saying you're not stupid and you're not insane. That's really what you're saying. Otherwise they're thinking, like, if you totally disagree with me, you must think either I'm stupid or insane. Well, I'm telling you, I don't think you're stupid. I don't think you're insane when I say that. All I think is I see it different than you see it.
Yeah, I respect. I unfriended a guy on Facebook the other day, and he wrote back, he was really hurt. And I said, look, I really respect your opinions. I just don't want to see them on my Facebook page. And you'll always be my friend, but the way you behave on Facebook is not the way I use Facebook. And so I gave him a little of both. I told him the truth about how I felt. I didn't back down, and yet I also told him the truth about the fact I've known him for a long time. He'll always be my friend anyway. Just, you don't get to talk
Just
to
quit insulting my other friends.
Yeah, well, those are my peeps. And he was really pretty hostile and a lot. He's what in internet parlance they call a troll, which is somebody that doesn't say what they think. They always tell you what they say you think, right?
Oh.
Their job is to interpret you for everybody else.
Dylan said you shouldn't let other people get your kicks for you.
Yeah,
that's not a good idea.
We don't need that. Anyway, we're just figuring out how to use a lot of these new cool computer tools, like premium audio programs. Hope you'll use our Send One to a Friend device at focusedpassion.com. That's a great reason to log in. You're probably sending these programs to your podcast folder in iTunes or using an RSS reader of some sort, but you've always got the option of using the built-in player at focusedpassion.com. Thanks a lot for being with us. We'll talk to you next week from Maui, Hawaii. As always, be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner. Aloha.